I'd now like to call upon Lisa Severson from the Eastern Ontario Regional Network to present connectivity for today and tomorrow. Lisa is no stranger to this region and the biggest advocate for broadband in Leeds Grenville. So here's the ironic part of this morning. Was Lisa, when I called Lisa, she was at her home in her residence, and unfortunately we lost our call. So I'm glad that you're here to fix that, and I look forward to hearing more.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I am a former county employee, so it's like coming home for me being here today. And I think EORN actually presented at the first Economic Development Summit that Leeds and Grenville held, I don't even know how many years ago. It seems like forever ago. But I'd like to take this opportunity to also thank Minister Clark and MP Barrett, as well as the Council of Leeds and Grenville. And I know Mayor Jones is here today. She was a member of our board of directors. So I'd like to thank everyone for their support. Without all of them, we would never have been able to make these projects work. Okay, so who is the Eastern Ontario Regional Network? We were developed and led by the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus. That is the 13 upper tier municipalities, the counties of Eastern Ontario. In our first project, we had 6 of the 10 separated municipalities participate with us in the project. That included Gananoque and Prescott. We represent about 1.1 million people. We are home to 6 First Nations. 4 of those First Nations participated in our first project. We were financed by our local governments to the tune of $10 million in the first project, the federal and provincial governments. We have a board of 9 members. 5 of them are made up of membership from the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus. We have 1 representative from the Eastern Ontario Mayor's Caucus, and we have 3 members who sit that have telecom, financial, or legal experience. We monitor the contracts that we have with the private sector until 2024, so we are diligently watching at a network level what is going on with the current network. So Eastern Ontario is a very large body of land. We are the same size as Nova Scotia. We have through our first project, 5,500 kilometers of fiber optic cable were added to the network. We have 160 points of presence. So a point of presence is that Bell building in your community that has telephone equipment, but it also links us to the worldwide net, and it was linked with fiber. With our first project, we built the backhaul network. We also, for last mile or access to the home, we used ADSL, which is through the telephone lines, fixed wireless, and a satellite component. 423,000 homes and businesses benefited from our project and have access to up to at least 10 megabits per second. We were able to fiber up 63 municipal business parks within Eastern Ontario. Our build, the cost was $175 million for the first project with a value of about $260 million. Since our project completed in 2015, the private sector has invested over $100 million into Eastern Ontario through upgrades to radios on fixed wireless equipment, fiber to the home projects, and they continue to make those investments with their own money, with no request from government subsidy. So, what did Leeds and Grenville contribute to the last project? Almost $700,000, but the investments into Leeds and Grenville was a little over $17 million. The return on investment for those dollars that were invested was a 26-to-1 ratio. We were able to connect over 39,000 homes to the up to 10 megabits, which is about a 94.5% coverage. Is this enough? No, I hear from people, as do, I'm sure, Minister Clark and MP Barrett on a regular basis, that They don't have adequate enough broadband, but how we use broadband has changed since we started that project in 2008. When we started our project, Netflix was not even in Canada at that point in time, and they use approximately 30% of all the bandwidth in Canada on one app. So as I said, we've had investment from some of our private sector partners. Bell has invested over $100 million in fibre to the home across Eastern Ontario. Gananoque and Kemptville have received fibre to the home projects. I know there are more rolling out in this area. Bell has also launched what's called WTTP, wireless to the premise. That is technology that is being mounted onto cellular towers in the region. It's rolling out in 2019, 2020. We will probably see some of that within the next few months in Leeds and Grenville. We do know that it is changing how some folks are receiving their internet at home. One of our co-leads who lives in the Peterborough area he was lucky to get a 2 megabit per second, and he's now consistently getting anywhere between 19 and over 25 megabits on a consistent basis. So that's good news for us, and that's all, as I said before, their own investment in the area. We know that smaller ISPs are doing work in the region. For example, WTC has done a fiber project in Perth, and others are doing projects as well. So on to our new project that we're undergoing right now. So as Steve and Michael have indicated, we have received funding from both the federal and provincial government this past year. It took us probably about 2 to 3 years to actually finally get that answer to yes. So sometimes looking for funding through our government bodies, it takes time to be able to get there. The Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus and the Mayor's Caucus are jointly putting in $10 million towards the project. We have 9 of the 10 separated municipalities in Eastern Ontario participating, and all of the 13 counties in Eastern Ontario. We are also anticipating that at least $61 million will have to be brought to the table by the mobile carriers to make this project work. So some of our goals for the project is we hope to achieve 99% coverage of our demand area, and I will talk a little bit more about what that area looks like further on in the presentation. We'll be able to make a cell call. We know that there's 10% of the region in Eastern Ontario where there is no carrier. There is 0 cell coverage at all. So if you have a medical emergency or need to make a call, you're not able to do that at this point in 10% of Eastern Ontario. We want to ensure that 95% of the Eastern Ontario region is able to access higher level of apps, and that's using FaceTime, banking apps, etc. And 85% of the region will be able to use high-definition video. So I'm sure most of your data plans will not let you stream a whole Netflix movie unless you want to do that. But for folks working in emergency services, having the ability to use that high-definition video will be paramount going forward in the future. We hope to be able to invest $34 million. It's not just issues with coverage in the area, but it's also capacity. So if you are in an area, especially in some of our urban areas, where we know that there's service, but if there's a festival in town or seasonal folks are in, if you are on a lake, you know that you can't necessarily make a call or use your cell phone because there's just not enough capacity in that network, and those are the things we're trying to fix. So before I get on to the definitions, I just want to talk a little bit more about some of the benefits. So we have had a study completed. We know that bringing this cell project could potentially increase jobs by 3,000. We know that there is a possibility of over $420 million in private sector business revenues by making this project a reality. We want to improve better public services and social connectivity in our communities, and we know that 5G is coming, and we don't want to be left behind. So I have to go through the definitions with you so you can understand how we did our methodology when we did the analysis. So regional coverage is for Eastern Ontario. Again, this is a conceptual design that we worked with a third-party company to create. It is a public-private partnership, so we will have contracts with the private sector. The EOWC and EORN will not own or operate the network, but we will have service-level agreements and performance measures to manage the project. We will make sure that the major roads in the region are covered and have access to cellular connectivity. And so when we talk about demand, Eastern Ontario, as I said, is 50,000 square kilometers. But what we've done is we've purchased impact data. We know where the businesses and residences are. And our demand area is where people live, work, and travel. And we have used MTO data counts and again, the impact data. So when you see the map, you're going shortly, you're going to see why that we keep stressing it's the demand area where people live, work, and travel. Capacity, I've already covered, and we know that with any type of technology, there's always challenges, and service levels can be impacted by weather and high local demand. So this is my map, and I apologize, it may be difficult to see, but everywhere where you see yellow, that is a demand area. Those are areas that we know that we need to improve coverage and capacity in the region. So the white areas, and I know this has happened in the past, somebody will take this presentation and they'll blow up the area and they'll say, well, I know that there's a house where there's all white. Well, if that's the case, you may not be getting taxes paid on that because all of the data comes from MPAC. So unfortunately, as much as we would have liked to have covered things like trails and Algonquin Park, we have a limited amount of funds, and at this point in time, again, we're only looking at the demand areas to cover. So these are the major roadways. As you can see, if your own home where you live in Leeds and Grenville, you don't see it on here, it means it's been covered off because we know where you live or where your business is. So this is a favorite slide of my CEO. He loves this slide. So this just explains a little bit of what we're trying to do. So those are two existing 3G sites. So you're driving along in your car and you're able to do and receive cell coverage in those areas. So as you move along and get closer to that tower, you're able to do more because you're receiving more better coverage and capacity. And with our project, we'd like to put an LTE site in and bridge the gap between those two 3G existing towers. As you can see, LG provides better coverage, larger coverage for the area, and there's the little car that goes zipping by that my CEO really likes to, he loves this slide. So municipalities will be key in this build out, and how can you help? If you have municipal lands that are available that you would be willing to have a TSP, telecommunication service provider build a tower on. So one thing I want to preface right up front, we will need to add towers. There needs to be towers to make this infrastructure work. They could be the large cell towers that you see now. There could be a combination of small cells throughout the region, but towers will have to be built. And we know sometimes that people don't necessarily like towers, but if you want to have the services, we have to build them. Local land use authorities will be asked to approve proposed tower sites in your municipality, And if you have a tower siting plan, that can make things much easier for you, and we can assist by providing templates, etc., if you don't already have one. And we would ask that you work with the private sector partners when they go to build on permitting and etc. We have run into recently the ISPs or the TSPs wanting to do work in municipalities, and it's slowing down because staff aren't able to get permits out or don't respond back. It may be a bit different with this project, but right now, if someone's coming in and asking you, and I'm not saying give away and not, don't charge, etc. That's your right as a municipality, but don't make it so onerous that those companies will walk away, because we know there have been instances where communities have been they have been working to try and bring a fiber to the home project, and because of the length of time it was taking for permits, etc., to be issued, they have walked away from those projects. And that's a sad thing for Eastern Ontario. What are the timelines? Well, we are currently negotiating the contribution agreement with the province. The province and the federal government, they will have a contract, and we will have our contract with the province. We're hoping that we are able to have a formal announcement in early 2020 that the contribution agreement has been executed. We are hoping as well that we can issue the RFP before the end of December, the request for proposal. We anticipate that request for proposal will be out to market for at least 4 months to give the private sector time to provide a fulsome submission back to us. We will then have to review the submissions as they come in. We also will be hiring staff. Right now there are 3 staff people pushing as well. We have 3 co-leads that are working with us that are the CAOs for 3 of our counties. They don't get paid. I'm a paid staff member, but it's a lot of work, and we'll need extra staff. We will be negotiating the contracts with the private sector, we hope, by mid-2020. And once all of our obligations, including First Nation consultation, is completed, we hope to have shovels in the ground in 2020. It will be at least a 4 to 5 year build, and our goal is to have the entire project done by 2025. So what else do we have on the go right now? So last year, the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus and the 13 members agreed to provide funding for us to do an analysis of what it would cost to bring the region to 5010, the CRTC mandated speeds, as well as what it would cost to bring Eastern Ontario up to a gig. So that's, you can read that on your own leisure, but basically the CRT stated that 90% of all Canadians should have access to 5010 by 2021. Well, we know in Eastern Ontario that isn't, we won't hit those numbers here, but federally, with large urban centers such as Vancouver, Calgary, Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, that they will probably reach those that standard of 90% of all Canadians. The CRT itself said in 2018 that only 27% of rural and remote households have access to 5010. And in 2019, after we've done our analysis, we know that 63% of the region have access to 5010, but if we take out our separated municipalities, that number goes down to 46%. So not even half of Eastern Ontario has access to those 5010 types of speeds. We have a long way to go to meet the objectives, and we don't want to be that last 10% that has to wait another 15 years to see those types of speeds. Our economy, our economic development, and our region depends on achieving those numbers faster. So initially, for our initial numbers, we have done what it would cost to bring 5010 to 95% of the premises across the region. And it would be using a mix of wireline, so that's either fiber or coax cable. And the last 25% would be on fixed wireless technology. And then our second analysis was how much would it be to bring a gig, which is 95% basically fiber, to each of the premises. I have to, again, stress that this is our model. We have received some input from the ISPs or the TSPs, but it is an engineered model at this point. So these are numbers, and they're big numbers. So the preliminary estimate to bring the 5010 to our region is anywhere between $500 and $750 million. And if we were going for the gig to the home, it's anywhere between $1.2 and $1.6 billion. So we have a lot of work to do in figuring out how we get there. The cost is variable. We know that utility pole costs and pole replacements have a huge impact on the overall cost of either of these two projects. And we know that in other provinces, the costs for those types of infrastructure make-ready costs are half of what we have in Ontario right now. So there are new federal and provincial funding streams. Connect to Innovate. Unfortunately, EORN was not eligible for that funding. The CRTC Broadband Fund, $750 million over 7 years. Again, we're not eligible to apply for that funding. They've announced the Universal Broadband Fund, and we are working on advocating that EORN and other entities like us, such as SWIFT, which is in southwestern Ontario, are eligible to access this type of funding. We have had initial discussions with the Canadian Infrastructure Bank. They have $1 billion that can be accessed. And with some of those preliminary discussions, it means that we have to have funding as well, subsidy from the federal and provincial governments, as well as from the municipalities, again, to make that work. Ontario has announced their strategy, and we're thankful for the $71 million committed for our cell project. The Western Wardens Caucus SWIFT project will receive $65 million from that program, and Northern Ontario will also probably have programs or money from that pot to do things in their area. We know that they're desperate for better connectivity as well. We know that $300 million has been allocated by the province of Nova Scotia. EORN actually worked with the province on creating their plan. Quebec has a $300 million plus project. We know that Northern New York State also will be receiving funds, so we don't want Eastern Ontario to be squished by our neighbors to the east and to the south, making economic development even more challenging for us because we don't have the tools and the infrastructure in place to make things happen. We are drafting an advocacy policy, as I stated, which will look at finding different ways to fund this. We are working and will continue to work with municipalities in Eastern Ontario to see how they can move forward even without EORN as their guiding, as leading, because we're doing it on a regional level. There's lots to be done, and we are around for another 10 years or so, and we'll keep pushing to ensure that Eastern Ontario is the best connected region in North America. That is one of our overall arching goals. Again, I know it's not perfect. I know that when we were building in 2010, the standard for internet was up to 1.5. So when we were building up to 10, and I say up to because those words have been the bane of my existence, and I think Minister Clark's existence, because when everyone is at home at 7 o'clock trying to stream Netflix with 4 or 5 people in your home, it oftentimes doesn't happen. And as Anne said, I work from home now, and I actually have a cell booster on my house, on my antenna, and there are many days that I am still only getting 1 bar on my cell phone to be able to work. So I'm happy to take questions if anyone has any, if I have time for questions, and I will be around for a bit and can talk to you privately after on break.